wait, how am I going to show you the comic now? Howdy, I'm Kurt Williams, and today we're talking about issue 1 of Torpedo, 1972. That's by Enrique, Sánchez, Abulí, and Eduardo, Risso. Well, if you couldn't tell by the title and the thumbnail and the intro to this video, I hate this comic. And that's mostly because of one scene in particular that I think is especially distasteful, but the comic as a whole is poorly written. For some perspective, Abulí has been writing these Torpedo comics since the 80s, and it's kind of episodic, like The Spirit by Will Eisner. We're following this character, Luca Torelli, and his sidekick, Rascal, who is a torpedo, which is a 1920s term for a hired killer. A lot of the original comics took place in the 1930s, but this comic takes place in 1972, so Torelli has aged quite a bit. The character Torelli is just a disgusting person. He has, like, no morality. He kills people for money, and he doesn't care about anybody else. And I get the sense that there were really no characters that were likable in any of the Torpedo comics. The point wasn't to have characters that you identify with. The point was just to have some grungy, noir, black and white detective thriller stuff that wasn't aimed for a pure audience like Dick Tracy or The Spirit. And the way that these Torpedo comics worked was you would have a few episodes per issue, so each episode would be 4 to 6 pages, which means that even though Abulí was just writing the comic, he still had to stretch his cartoonist skills. He had to make a lot of things happen really quickly, so transitions were kind of sharp. There wasn't a lot of time for feeling the moment, it was just getting the story across and getting to the gag at the end. And that is my first issue with Torpedo 1972, is that it's not episodic, it's one story that lasts 4 issues, but it still feels so choppy and fast as if it's paced out for an episode. Transitions between scenes are so noticeably bad. Even if you don't consider yourself an art critic, you would notice how choppy this comic feels. The dialogue is way too snappy. People are saying things unprovoked all the time just because we have to get exposition across quickly, or Abulí feels like we have to get exposition across quickly. And there are also just a bunch of outdated one-liner jokes that do not hit the way they would have hit 50 years ago. So the first time I read this issue, knowing nothing about Torpedo, I thought that it was by some new writer who had no idea what they were doing. But nope, turns out Abulí was probably in his early 70s when he wrote this story, and he's just entirely out of touch with the medium. Eduardo Risso's art is good, it matches the genre. He's not exactly my favorite artist ever, but he did great in 100 Bullets, and he was doing pretty good in Moonshine from what I've read so far. And maybe it's that Risso and Abulí are both Spanish, and Abulí is kind of a legendary Spanish cartoonist, and that's why Risso wanted to work with him in the first place. But honestly, I'm a little surprised that Risso actually went through with this and drew this script. Not just because of the terrible writing overall, but because of one scene in particular that this video is really about. And for those of you who might need it, this is your trigger warning. I'm about to talk about sexual assault. So the first scene that we see in this issue is two of the main characters, a journalist and a photographer, watching The Godfather, because this is 1972. They're sitting next to each other in the theater, and he does the smooth move of putting his arm around her shoulder, and she doesn't really mind, but then he starts kind of groping her, and she starts to hate it. So she slaps him, and they leave, and he's like, why don't you let me touch you? We're engaged. And she tells him to leave it for the wedding, and that's the end of it for now. So the journalist and his fiancée, the photographer, go to meet Luca Torelli so that he can work on a story he's writing about gangsters in New York, and he's a disgusting, violent old man who kills pigeons in the park and makes all kind of dumb innuendos all the time. But she invites Torelli back to her apartment so that she can get some nice photos of him for the newspaper. So he shows up to her apartment the next day, and of course she's dressed in this tiny outfit. It's noir, what do you expect? Every woman involved is gonna be gorgeous and sexy. And that can be an irritating trope, but irritating at worst, right? So anyway, one of the photos that she wants to get of him involves him holding her from behind as if she's his hostage. And of course, Torelli is a disgusting, amoral old man, so it goes exactly how you'd expect. And then it goes much farther than you'd expect, and we have a straight-up rape scene. And then, on the next page, we see the journalist getting home to console her after she's called him in tears, and when she tells her fiancé that this guy just raped her, he says, "My God, and I missed it," which is mind-blowingly terrible. Like, what? What? Just goes to show the total disconnect from reality that Abulí has at this point. So what does she do in response to her fiancé saying that? Well, she gives him a slap. She just slaps him right on the face. And then she looks kind of angry, but that's really the end of it. We just kind of move on from there. And the only thing that comes from that is that now this journalist wants to name Torelli in his article so that the rival mob family will go and kill Torelli for him. So a woman was raped in the issue purely so that a journalist would have an excuse for revenge, which would send Torelli into a nostalgic Torpedo gang war. And that is a perfect example of women in fridges. And women in fridges is a whole other video, but if you don't know what it is, here's the Cliff's Notes. Sometime in the 90s, I think writer Gail Simone coined the term women in refrigerators, highlighting the trope of women characters being unfairly abused in comics purely for plot devices. More specifically, women in refrigerators refers to an issue of Green Lantern where Kylo Rayner's girlfriend is killed and then shoved into his refrigerator by one of his enemies. And that is the part of the plot that compels Kylo Rayner to seek revenge against his enemy. So the woman died entirely as a plot device. So in Torpedo 1972, we have a whole cast of unlikable characters, which is pretty par for the course for a Torpedo issue. We have pacing that goes way too fast. We don't have any time to sit in any moment and really feel the drama of it. And those two things combined with the perfect example of women in refrigerators just leads to a whole big ball of I don't think so. And listen, I'm not saying no sexual assault in fiction ever, and I'm not saying no violence against women in fiction ever, because that's ridiculous. Art reflects life, and these things are part of life, and even though they're ugly parts of life, good can come of exploring these ugly things in a way that helps people process it or understand it better. For example, I've got issue 2 of Watchmen right here, which is the issue in the series that includes a detailed description of rape. But we have multiple characters and multiple issues to explore that event. We can see the immediate, semi-realistic fallout of the event, we can see the long-term trauma that it causes, and more importantly, we can see the victim's journey to acceptance of what happened. And that's the difference. If you're gonna try to write a story using these dark, deeply personal themes, then you'd better be ready to put on your big boy pants and do it with respect. And this issue has no respect. If you've been a victim of this, or you're close with someone who's been a victim of this, then this issue is deeply upsetting. Enrique Sánchez Abulí wrote a terrible story, and somehow Eduardo Risso thought it would be fine to jump on board. But let me be clear, I'm not saying that we should cancel these two artists. Yeah, Abulí is out of touch and probably should retire from comics anyway, and Risso should have sent the script back when he read it the first time. But like I said in my video about Ed Piskor, we shouldn't just turn our backs on the people who make this craft what it is. Instead of casting them out and making sure they never find work again, let's just let them know that this is too far and they need to take a step back. So here's what I want. Here's the action item of the video. There are 3 more issues of this series coming out. It's a 4-issue miniseries. Do not buy those issues. Encourage your friends not to buy the issues. Post on social media encouraging people not to buy the issues. Tell your local comic store that you will definitely not buy the issues if they put them in the store. I know what I titled the video, but we're not trying to ban the book, because once you ban a book, it gets more power, and then people think there must be something amazing about it that they have to ingest. And that's counter to what we want. We want people not to encourage this kind of thing. So, sorry about the misleading title. It was clickbait. I know you hate clickbait. I hate clickbait too, but we're all slaves to it. It works. Sorry. So let Abulí and Risso know that this will not stand. Do it on social media. Send a private message if you want to be more discreet about it. Definitely don't pick up any more issues of it. We can't support this kind of thing. We have to send a message that this is over the line. Maybe if a better writer had tried to tackle the issue, it would have been fine. But this is just the 3 words I would use to describe this comic are atrocious, reprehensible, and icky. And if you read it, don't buy any more issues. It's garbage.